Hi everyone, it's Salia from HustleSZN, and today I wanted to do a really quick video about the Kiss Quotient, which I read just last week for a book club with my friends. I should give a shout out to Shneha and Leah for being in my book club because their opinions are going to be intertwined into this, so shout out to y'all. I thought that I'd make a quick video about what the good stuff and the bad stuff about this book are, and hopefully help some people decide whether or not they want to read it. So the premise of the book is about this girl named Stella who has Asperger's, although that's no longer a diagnosis. So I think she's on the spectrum for autism. And then she wants to learn how to be good at having sex. It's not really explained why. I think she determines that that'll help her somehow. But anyways, she decides that she wants to get better at having sex. And so she decides to hire an escort. And the escort ends up being this half Swedish, half Viet guy who looks like Daniel Henney and also has some low self-esteem and some issues. And yeah, it sounds kind of not interesting, but it actually is very interesting. I really liked it. So my overall rating for this book was a 3.5 out of 5 stars if I take into account everything. However, if I just look at entertainment factor and how much did I enjoy the read, I would definitely give it 4.5 if not 5. I really loved this book. And I want to make it clear that this will be kind of biased, but the reason that I wanted to make this book, or make a video about this book in particular, is because it has been so long since I have felt like I've been obsessed with a book. You know when it physically hurts to read the book, every breath literally hurts because you're reading and you're so invested and you feel everything the characters are feeling, but times 100. I had one of those experiences with this book, and I haven't had that in a very long time. I think the last one was maybe Divergent, and I read that in 2013, 2014. So it's been a while, and I also feel like I'm a little bit older for people on YouTube. I'm 27 right now, and I feel although YA is my main thing, sometimes when I'm reading it, it's a little bit harder for me to connect to the characters because I am a bit older, I guess. But then when I read the adult books, I also don't really connect to them either, because usually it's not so much their age, it's that they're at a different stage in their life. I'm still a student even though I'm older than the YA category, but I can still relate to them. Whereas when I'm reading the adult books where it's a 30 or 40-year-old, usually it's they've already been married, or they might have been divorced already, they have 2 kids, or their career's established. So even though I might be closer in age to the adult books, I don't actually usually relate that much to them, just where they are in life. But this one was a good balance, I felt, of the two. I actually think they're similar, 26 or 27 years old as well. She is more established in her career, the main character Stella, but I don't know, I was still able to relate to her. She was definitely recently started working, you know what I mean, still single, blah blah blah. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I was able to connect to her more than I usually am able to connect to adult characters, and I think that was part of it. And then the other thing too is for me at least, reading this book was strangely relatable. I don't have autism at all, but I think if you have any degree of social awkwardness, or even a little bit of social anxiety could probably go in there as well. If you are just not the best at social skills, I think you'll be able to relate to her quite a bit. But at least for me, in reading it, that was the thing that drew me in the most, is that I don't usually read about people who think so much about social etiquette and so much about if what they're doing is socially acceptable or not. And that's something I do all the time, because I know that I'm trash at it. So I'm constantly being is this what you say? Is this person offended? Is whatever. So in that way, I 100% related to Stella. Obviously, hers goes more in depth because she has all the other symptoms that would come along with falling on the spectrum. So the uniqueness of Stella's perspective was the #1 best thing about this book, in my opinion. Even in talking to my friends who have read the book, even though they didn't have any social awkwardness at all, they still felt the most exciting and interesting part of this book was getting that new perspective of somebody who does have autism disorder. And so I think that's the best part about this book, and it's the most insightful and the thing you'll probably take away the most of. So that's #1. The other kind of relatable thing is this fear of intimacy. So if you have that as well, I think this would be a good book for you. She struggles a lot with that, and it was pretty interesting to see. Not just emotionally, because a lot of people are emotionally unable to, but she had physical and emotional struggles for intimacy, so that was really interesting to see. The next best thing was just that overall this book is a really easy read. In my opinion, it reads very much so like almost like, I'm gonna say K-drama because they mention it a lot in the book, but kind of just like that. It has that addictive quality of like, you don't have to think too much. You're just like there for the ride, and the book goes by really quickly, so you can definitely read it in a day. And that's a plus because sometimes, you're in a slump or whatever, and you just need that little pick-me-up, and you want a book where you don't have to think too much, and you just want to be like swept away in it. So if you're looking for some quality escapism, I would say this is a good book for that. Also, if you're doing like readathons or something where you need to read a lot of pages really quickly, this one would be like super fast. You could get it done in a day. The other thing, so one of the things Shania brought up was that it was kind of cool that I guess I haven't mentioned it. There's a lot of sex in this book. But anyways, the good part of that is that almost all of it was pretty consensual. And the times where it wasn't consensual, it was like addressed. So that was pretty cool. And not only was it consensual, it wasn't like awkwardly cringy consensual. I don't read a lot of romance, but Shania says that a lot of times if they try to make consent part of the book, it actually makes it really awkward to read. But this book didn't lose its like sexiness appeal in favor of having consent. It like was able to have both of them together and done in a like still attractive way, if that makes sense. So that's good, and it's helping to normalize consent, etc. Another thing too, which I'm gonna add to the whole vibe of how much sex there is, I think that the book actually did well at having like a good balance of crude sexiness and then cute innocent sexiness, and then bringing them together. My friends didn't agree with me. They thought there was just way too much, but I thought it did an okay job of balancing the two, which I guess leads me to this next point. Whether or not you'll like this book will depend on how much you like reading smut, I guess, because there is so much. I think at least 75% of this book, they are naked or half naked. And not only that, I think I liked it, or I didn't mind it, I guess, because the sex scenes still advanced the plot. It wasn't just like out of nowhere they decide that they're horny and do it. But my friends disagree. I guess it's like half-half. In my opinion, it helped progress because Stella's, one of her biggest issues with throughout this whole thing is that she wants to learn to be able to be intimate and to tolerate touch and different sensations, because like part of the autism syndrome is that you feel things too much sometimes, so there's the possibility for overstimulation for them. And so part of it was like her learning to manage and deal with all of that, which I thought was really interesting. I will say though that because there's a lot of smut, there's gonna be a lot of like really cringy sentences and a lot of things that repeat a lot. So if you're one of those people who hardcore analyzes sex scenes and whether the metaphor is a reasonable one or not, I think there's definitely room for you to find flaws. Me personally, I remember like one sentence that they repeated a ton was something about like her curves melting into his angles. By the end of the book, I'd at least read that sentence maybe 5 times, but there's definitely like a lot of cringy things. She has like these nipples that can poke his eyes out, like things like that, where I think if you take it too seriously, you won't enjoy it, but if you're just reading it for the sake of reading it, you might like it. The last thing I'd just like to say is that I think one of its strengths was just that it kind of inspired me at the end of the day to go out there and try to make your own happiness, because even though it's like a weird setup that seems like in the end it's really just so that you can write love scenes, Stella still like took control of her life and decided, hey, I'm not having the type of intimate things that I'm having, so I'm gonna hire an escort, which is still like a boss ass move. And so she kind of inspired me not to go hire an escort necessarily, but to like, I don't know, be more assertive in creating your own happiness and doing the things you wanted. So for one example is I made weekend plans after reading this book. In the end, I didn't follow through with all of them. I still flopped on a few, but it was just the idea that you should take an active role in trying to make your happiness. She also kind of inspired me to make like a list of goals that I wanted to achieve. They're like sports related things, so I won't share them. And given that it's the end of the year and New Year's resolutions are coming up, I think that this would be a good book to read. Assuming most people are busy with holiday stuff, it's the end of the year, you probably want to reach your Goodreads goal. So this literally checks off all of those boxes. It's easy to read, you don't have to think too much, it'll be fun, and it'll inspire you to want to do better for next year and to go after your dreams and go after your goals, etc., etc. So for all those reasons, I highly recommend you go read The Kiss Quotient. And because I have to, in order to stay objective, I'm now gonna list some reasons why I think you might not like the book. And if any of them apply to you, then you can consider not reading the book. although I highly recommend you do. So my first point was, I've kind of covered it already, but just that there is a shit ton of sex in this book. So if you're not into that, then obviously you're not going to enjoy the book, even if you like the story. Like, there's so much of it that if you're not into graphic scenes, like, you're not going to like the book. So it's not full-blown erotica. It's like very soft, but it's there all the time. And if you're one of those people who gets like annoyed that they're constantly in bed, then you might not like this book either. And like I said, if you kind of analyze too much, like obviously there are gonna be cringy moments when you're reading about this, and when there's so many scenes, I think there's just a lot of opportunity for weird cringy things to happen. So this book is slightly tropey and it is very predictable. I personally didn't mind that, as I've come to learn from Shniha. Some people take comfort in knowing where the story is gonna go, so if you're one of those people, you might actually like it. But if you wanted something like super fresh, this still follows a lot of tropes, although I would argue that there's a few things that it kind of has turned on its head, which was nice. So at the end of the book, the author mentions how she wanted to do a gender swap version of Pretty Woman. So in this case, it's the female character who's established, who's like super wealthy, who decides to hire an escort. Like almost always it's like the escort would be a female, but in this case it's a guy. And so I guess it kind of like challenges some gender stereotypes, so if you're into that, potentially. Although like the overall course of like they hire an escort and fall in love is still fairly predictable. And the fact that she has this autism spectrum disorder is still something new, because I don't know, I've only learned about it in children, so I don't even really know, like representation wise, I don't know how well it was. Although it's based off of an Own Voices thing, like the author has had it herself, and she writes some really interesting things. Apparently, when we think of classic features of autism and autism spectrum disorder, we think of how it presents in males, and it's not usually the same in females, which is like so fascinating, because I think so much of medicine's like that. It's kind of the same with like how heart attacks, we learn the classic image will always be how a guy will present, but then women don't necessarily present that way. And in a lot of other things too, like women will generally have atypical presentations because a lot of the research was done on men to begin with. So I thought from that perspective, it was really cool to see how autism spectrum disorder might play out differently in a female as opposed to a male. And she also, like the author, put some resources at the end for books that she's used to research it as well, because she wasn't really diagnosed until later in life, and she had to do some readings herself just to kind of get a more full image, just instead of just her own experiences. I still think it was really cool, and I definitely think it's a valid representation. And then a couple of the other stuff that would maybe turn you off from this book. This happened to my friend, but if you happen to know anybody like close to you or relatives named Mike, the main guy's name is Mike. So if it's gonna bother you to read sex scenes with that name, then maybe don't read this book. And then the other stuff is just that this book like only focuses, well in my opinion, really only focuses on the main couple. It doesn't like hash out these side characters too much. For me, I didn't mind, because when I was reading it, I was like so obsessed and gung-ho with the main couple that I like really didn't want to waste time learning about other characters. But some people prefer to have well-rounded side characters. I know some people like all those other extra details, and they might find it lazy that the other people weren't expanded upon that much. One of the other criticisms that was brought up at the book club, they didn't find the male love interest's POV as entertaining or as good as Stella's, and they would have preferred if it was just her POV. So that's something to consider, I guess. He's like insecure, so if you've read a lot of YA, you know that some people, I don't know if it's a trope necessarily, but when your insecurity like leads you to make really dumb decisions, but they're so blinded by their insecurity that like they almost, despite the other person doing actions that would say, okay, like this is something only someone who loves you would do, they're so caught up in their insecurities that they won't see that, and it causes problems, it causes miscommunication. Yeah, I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but that's like a very common scenario in YA books in general. If that type of scenario is one that would bother you, that happens so much in this book, because both characters struggle hardcore with loving themselves. So otherwise, I think it's a really fun read, and there is some insight to be had, and worst comes to worst, like if you really hate all the smut, you could skip all that and you would be done the book in literally like an hour at most, I think. And I think you'd still get most of it. Like, you'd understand most of what was happening. It'd just have been like a fun, not even rom-com, like a Hallmark movie, like a fun Hallmark movie in under an hour. So that is my pitch for you to go read The Kiss Quotient, especially over the holidays. If you did read the book and love it or hate it, I'd obviously love to know. Or if you have any other books where it physically hurt to read the book, obviously let me know down below and I will try to read them, because I am on break soon and hopefully we'll have more time to do bookish related things. Otherwise, I hope everybody has a happy December. Bye! Oh my god, I'm dying. Bye! Oh wait, no. This is so disorganized.